see me in 9 months. Surprise! So today I'm going to be talking about 3 concepts, really 3 ways of doing good work in the world that I think we need to talk about in closer relationship to one another. And those 3 things are humanitarianism, design, and local activism. Today, really, I just want to get you all psyched and inspired to use the skills that you have as designers, and we have so many, to lead social change efforts in the communities that you live and work in. Right now, we're seeing many emerging models for applying design expertise abroad, especially in the developing world. Big foundations like the Gates Foundation, Hewlett, and others are making big investments in the power of design thinking to move the needle on global issues like health and poverty and even human rights. And global humanitarian work is now kind of sexy. There's a cachet and a star power attached to it. And but seriously, it's really about fostering a sense of obligation that we have as first world citizens to extend some of the privilege that we have here to those living in far worse conditions. But let me ask you a question. Is there the same level of commitment to and investment in our local communities? Are we even as aware of the need in our own back alleys? And maybe the hardest question of all, do we care as much? Do we care as much about these local issues and about these people? And so, by the way, I'm just showing you the results of a simple Google image search for homeless in San Francisco. And I'm going to be referring a bit to San Francisco today because that's the locality and the community that I know the best, having lived here for about 14 years now. But the opportunity for local design activism, and maybe this is obvious to you, it exists everywhere. And that's because human need exists everywhere. It's the sad truth, but it also represents the huge opportunity that we have as designers to step in. A city like San Francisco is such an easy place to idealize. Think about how beautiful it is here, how progressive our culture and our politics are. We have an amazing spirit of innovation. But what you can't see from a bird's eye view of the city is the human need that is ever present and that stares us in the face every day. Need and the concept of who is needy is very tricky to define. By some measures, nobody in America needs a thing. We're all fine here. And the thinking goes, there are always people worse off somewhere else in the world. I think this is a pretty dangerous mentality to fall into because we see human need as not existing here at home, but somewhere else, somewhere far away, over there. It's also just not productive to fall into this cycle of awareness and guilt and then worse, inaction. It's just not productive to think that the only way to make a difference is to move to sub-Saharan Africa. And more than that, flying across the world, I don't think, is the best way to create lasting outcomes. It's neither sustainable for you as the designer or for the people you're trying to help. At some point, we're going to need to leave those communities and come back home. Social change is a complex, it's a very messy business. It takes a long time. And so I think we're all best positioned to create long-term outcomes when we're working within our own communities. So many of you are already enmeshed in local design activism, which is awesome. We saw some great examples in the last module from Alex and John. But do we see our work as a form of community service? If not, I think we should. And we're lucky in the US to have such a rich and long-standing tradition of community service that's supported and backed at the highest levels. We have this pioneering DIY spirit that cuts pretty deeply into our culture. Think of programs and service delivery models like a soup kitchen or AmeriCorps or like a trash pickup day. These models, more so than global humanitarian work, I think are relevant for designers to learn from when you're looking to make a difference in your own community. So I mentioned earlier that social change is a complex and messy business. This is absolutely true at the local level, and I learned this while working at SPUR, a civic organization based here in San Francisco. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with SPUR, but it's over 100 years old. It was founded by housing activists after the 1906 earthquake. And the organization's approach is to work across sectors, to work with business leaders, to work with partners in the nonprofit world and with city government to improve local issues like affordable housing or environmental justice and so on. And so at SPUR we made some real policy inroads, but it's tough work. Like, these are really contentious issues with many competing voices and priorities. And many of these processes to change something gets stuck. You know, homelessness in San Francisco is the classic issue. We've totally failed as a city, as a community, to move the needle on homelessness in any significant way, really since I've lived here over the past 10 or 15 years. So here's where designers step in. Designers, in my experience, are some of the best facilitators and consensus builders. In some cases, we do need more creative solutions, and as designers with our generative capabilities, we're absolutely equipped to provide those, but a lot of times we don't need more ideas. We need more alignment, and we need more action. Designers are amazing at pushing a process forward. We push things out of the talking phase into the doing phase, and whether that's because of our creative nature or because of our training, we're innately kind of hardwired to do stuff. It's in our DNA. But we can't do it alone. And I hope I'm not harshing anybody's mellow by saying this, but designers alone cannot save the world. To have the impact we aspire to, we need partners. We need them in the business world, we need them in the public sector, and we need them in nonprofit leaders as well. And I guess just one word on government. I know we can get really sort of down and cynical about how slow and bureaucratic government, especially at the local level, can be. But I'll show you in a second how government has the capacity to scale up in an individual project to have more widespread effect. So here's an example of a designer-led cross-sector partnership in action. At SPUR, I led a DIY urbanism initiative to draw some attention to the role that designers can play as leaders in their communities. And with the onset of the recession in 2008 and the housing crash that followed, there was a lot of really amazing energy in San Francisco and actually in many cities across the US around repurposing vacant lots of land for public use. In this particular case, following the demolition of the Central Freeway, designers, real estate executives, city leaders, nonprofit leaders, they all collaborated to make use of vacant land originally slated for development. And with construction at a standstill, several lots formerly under that freeway overpass that I showed you sat idle. Designers and especially community leaders saw this as a huge opportunity. A slab of pavement was transformed into a community garden, in this case called the Hayes Valley Farm, and tended to by school kids, neighborhood volunteers, and the homeless. And this is the thing I really want to emphasize here with this case study, is that through a partnership with city government, designers were able to design a permit process whereby anybody else in the city could do something similar. We tend to think of government, again, as a drag, but in this case, they were absolutely the key partner. So I'm going to close with a couple of principles for getting started as a local design activist. First, recognize that we are experts in our own communities. If you think about the ramp-up time and the research and the assimilation it takes to understand a culture other than your own, whether that community is elsewhere in the US or across the world, it's pretty significant. And I would say a lot of that is actually not necessary when you're working in your own community. Another lesson comes from the world of product development, where we use this framework of a minimum viable product, or an MVP, to break down a large vision into small pieces. And essentially, without getting too much into it, MVP is a way of deciding where to start, to prevent paralysis by analysis, and to get a first version of something out into the world. And I think this framework is really applicable to design activism. In my experience, do-gooders tend to be really big thinkers, which is amazing, and they set out to boil the ocean, but sometimes we don't need more vision. What we need is a way to break the vision down into small pieces, and to figure out what is most important to do in the short term. And then whatever we do in the short term can always come back to inform the larger vision later. Working locally also offers a way out of this vicious cycle. It offers a more sustainable situation for yourself. So again, we get out of this mentality of thinking we need to move somewhere else to do something good in the world. It's more sustainable for the people you're helping, which I mentioned before. And then it's also a way out of this, mentality that we sometimes feel, and I'm sure you can relate to this as designers after a late night in the studio, of being like, isn't there more to design than this? Isn't there more to design than pixel pushing? So lastly, I just want to come back to some of my original thoughts on human need. Let's just all remember that human need is everywhere. It's halfway across the world, but it's also right here. Human need exists everywhere in the world, and that world includes our back alleys. But everywhere, too, is the potential to make a difference. And at the very least, we can create a moment of joy for somebody that, if you work locally, you will actually get to know over time and develop a really close relationship with. And this is possible, of course, using the skills and superpowers that we all have as designers. Thanks.